This homestead now belongs to my father-in-law. You can't live here anymore, Dad. Tasha's words sliced the air like a sharpened knife. I sat on the porch of the house I built with my own hands 40 years ago, watching the sun fall over my fields. My fields, or so I believed until that moment. I smiled and nodded. All right, baby girl, if that's what you want. But Tasha didn't know who she was dealing with. I had spent the whole week preparing for my daughter's visit. Months had gone by without seeing her, and when she called to say she was coming with an important surprise, hope swelled in my chest. I thought maybe she had reflected on our relationship, that perhaps she wanted to spend more time with me in my later years. I cleaned the whole house, cooked her favorite meal, even bought fresh flowers to dress the dining room table. Like a fool, I believed my daughter had come to make peace with me. But when she arrived that Saturday afternoon, she wasn't alone. Harlan, her father-in-law, accompanied her with a smile I disliked the instant I saw it. It was calculated, cold. Tasha barely greeted me, and when I asked about my grandson, she said he was busy and couldn't come. During dinner, I noticed something strange in her behavior. She avoided my eyes, answered with single words, and Harlan seemed to steer the entire conversation. "Mr. Langston," Harlan said as he sliced his meat, "Tasha tells me you've been having trouble keeping up this property." I stared at him, puzzled. Trouble? My homestead produced enough to live comfortably. I had my cattle, my crops, my trusted hands. "I don't know what trouble you're talking about," I replied. Tasha finally looked up, and the expression on her face is one I'll never forget. A mix of pity and determination that chilled my blood. "Dad, you can't go on living out here alone. You're too old, and this responsibility is too big for you." Her words hit me like a lightning bolt. Too old. I had just turned 69. I rose every morning at 5, personally supervised every inch of my land, and my mind was as clear as spring water. Harlan nodded with false gravity. "That's why we've thought of a solution that benefits everyone." That was when Tasha pulled some papers from her purse and spread them across the table as casually as pouring coffee. "Dad, I already spoke with my father-in-law. He's going to take charge of the homestead from now on. He has experience in the field, he understands business, and he can give this land the management it needs." My eyes skimmed the documents without fully understanding what I was seeing. There were stamps, signatures, and my name appeared in several places. "What does this mean, Tasha?" I asked, though a part of me already knew the answer. Harlan leaned forward and adopted a paternal tone that insulted me. "Mr. Langston, it means you won't have to worry about anything anymore. I'll take care of everything. The hands, the crops, the finances, the important decisions. You'll be able to rest easy knowing your homestead is in good hands." Tasha added quickly, "And don't worry about where you'll live, Dad. You can stay in the service room. It's small but comfortable, and that way, if we need to consult you about anything, you'll be right there." The service room, the place where seasonal workers had slept during harvest. They wanted to turn me into an employee in my own home. I searched my daughter's face for any trace of the little girl who used to run through these same corridors, help me feed the chickens, and say that when she grew up she wanted to be like her daddy. But that little girl no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who saw me as an obstacle, a problem to solve. "And if I don't agree?" I asked, my voice sounding weaker than I wanted. Harlan and Tasha exchanged a complicit glance before he answered. "Mr. Langston, you already signed these documents last week when you were in town. Don't you remember?" His tone was condescending, as if speaking to a small child or to someone losing his mind. Sometimes age plays tricks on our memory. It felt like a punch to the gut. Signed documents. I had never signed anything to transfer my homestead. My memory was perfect, and I remembered every detail of my last trip into Riverton. I'd gone to buy supplies and to greet friends in the square, nothing more. "I didn't sign a thing," I said firmly, but Harlan already had his answer ready. "Dad," Tasha interjected softly, but decisively, "you were very confused that day. Marcus, the notary, called us concerned because you were saying strange things. You mentioned seeing your dead brother talking to you. My brother passed 15 years ago, and I had never suffered hallucinations or mental problems. It was a brazen lie, but the way she said it, with that mix of feigned concern and sorrow, almost made me doubt my own sanity for a moment. Harlan stood and walked to the window, contemplating my land as if it already belonged to him. "Mr. Langston, I understand this is hard to accept. Mental decline is natural at your age, but don't worry. We'll make sure you have a dignified, peaceful old age." His words dripped with cruelty disguised as kindness, and my stomach turned. Tasha came closer and laid her hand on my shoulder. It was the first time she had touched me all night, and what should have been comforting felt like a goodbye. "Dad, you don't have to carry all these responsibilities anymore. You can rest, read, walk the garden. Harlan will handle everything else." The garden, as if I were a creaky old man allowed to stroll the yard of a home for the aged. I looked again at the papers. The signatures looked authentic, but I knew I had never put my name on those pages. Someone had forged my hand with great skill. While I processed this monumental betrayal, I heard Harlan murmur something to Tasha. "When can we start with the changes we discussed?" he asked in a low voice. Low, but not so low that I couldn't hear. "What changes?" I asked, already suspecting I wouldn't like the answer. Tasha hesitated before replying. "Well, Dad, some things are going to be different. For example, Harlan thinks we have too many workers. He's going to let some of them go to make the operation more efficient." Miss Lila had worked for me for 20 years. Calvin had tended my cattle since he was a teenager. Reggie knew every square meter of my fields better than I did. "Those folks depend on these jobs to feed their families," I protested. Harlan turned from the window with a cool smile. "Mr. Langston, you think with your heart, not your head. That's precisely why this place hasn't reached its true potential. When I take control, we're going to modernize everything. New techniques, fewer people, greater productivity." Tasha nodded enthusiastically, as if speaking of something wonderful. "Harlan has a lot of experience in rural management. He knows how to make a property truly profitable." The word profitable sounded obscene on her lips. This homestead had never been just a business to me. It was my life, my legacy, the fruit of 40 years of honest work and sacrifice. "And what about family traditions?" I asked, desperate to find something that might make them reconsider. "This land has been in our family for generations. Your granddaddy started with barely 5 acres. Tasha sighed impatiently. "Dad, those are things of the past. Now we have to think about the future, being competitive, taking advantage of market opportunities." Harlan returned to the table and sat across from me with the attitude of a man closing a business deal. "Mr. Langston, let me be frank. This property is worth a lot of money, but it's being mismanaged. With the right improvements, we could triple its value in less than 2 years." His eyes gleamed with greed, and that's when I understood his plan. I saw the hunger in his eyes when he mentioned money, and in that moment I understood his real plan. "And besides," Harlan continued smoothly, "Tasha tells me you've been having some episodes, forgetting names, mixing up dates, sometimes not recognizing people." Another lie. My mind was as clear as it had ever been, but I realized they'd been building a story about my supposed senility to justify what they were doing. Tasha avoided my gaze as she added, "We've also noticed you've lost a lot of weight, Dad. You're not taking care of your health. You need someone to be responsible for you." It was true I dropped a few pounds these past months, but only because I've been fixing the north fence and working harder than usual. Nothing a lighter diet and honest labor couldn't explain. I rose from the table slowly, feeling the weight of my near 70 years not in my bones, but in the betrayal I had just uncovered. My own daughter, the child I raised after her mother passed, was stealing everything I'd built in this life. "All right," I said at last, with a calm that even surprised me. "If that's what you've decided, I accept." Harlan and Tasha exchanged a look of relief, as if they'd braced for a fight. "I knew you'd understand, Mr. Langston," Harlan said with oily cordiality. "This is best for everyone." Tasha leaned in and kissed my cheek, and it felt like the kiss of Judas. "Thank you for understanding, Dad. I'll get the service room ready to be more comfortable for you." That night, while they celebrated in the main dining room of my house, I lay awake in the small room that was supposedly my new home. Their laughter filtered through the thin walls, a chorus of triumph in a place I had built with my own hands. They planned changes to my property as if I were already dead. But they didn't know something important. I wasn't the confused old fool they thought I was. And that night, I decided they were about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. Around 3 in the morning, when their laughter finally dwindled, I rose to get a glass of water. Barefoot, I slipped through the hallways whose creaks and shadows I knew better than my own breath. Passing the study, I heard low voices. Tasha and Harlan were still awake, and what I heard next iced my blood. "Are you sure he suspects nothing?" Harlan whispered. "Not at all," Tasha replied, her voice clear. "He swallowed it completely. He's always been too trusting, too kind. That's been his weakness all his life." I pressed myself to the wall and held my breath. "Perfect," Harlan murmured. "Tomorrow I'll start contacting the buyers I already identified. That northern parcel is a gold mine for development. The construction folks are ready to pay triple what it's worth as farmland." My heart stuttered. Buyers. Development. Not only had they robbed my homestead, they intended to destroy it. "And what do we do with him?" Tasha asked, referring to me like a piece of furniture you haul to the curb. Harlan paused. "We already talked about that. With the medical documents we obtained, it'll be easy to prove he needs specialized care. Once we sell, we'll have enough to place him in a discreet facility." "You mean a nursing home?" Tasha's voice trembled with the faintest flicker of conscience. "Not exactly a nursing home," Harlan said, that calculating tone I come to hate. "There are cheaper places, institutions that specialize in difficult cases, people who can't take care of themselves. Places that don't ask many questions. Limited visiting hours." My knees weakened. They didn't just want to steal my land. They wanted me locked away somewhere ugly and forgotten. Tasha was quiet for a long time. I thought maybe, just maybe, there was a spark of humanity left. But her next words crushed that hope. "How long do you think it'll take to sell everything?" "With the right contacts?" 3 months, Harlan said. "The land, the house, the cattle, the equipment, everything. After expenses and commissions, we'll clear about 8 million. 40 years of my life, reduced to a number they plan to split as if it were loose change." "And my share?" Tasha asked. Harlan chuckled softly. "You're my daughter-in-law. Your share is making sure your family's future is secured. With that kind of money, your husband can finally start the business he wants. Your kids can go to the best schools. You'll never worry about money again." "Sometimes I feel guilty," Tasha whispered. "He's my father." Harlan scoffed. "Your father had his time to enjoy this property. Now it's time for the next generation to profit from what he never knew how to maximize. Besides, we're not leaving him on the street. He'll be well cared for." As if locking me in a mental institution were charity. I slipped back to the small room, my heart pounding so hard I feared it would echo off the plaster. I sat on the narrow bed, and for a few long minutes, I let the bitterness wash over me. The rage, the disappointment, the rupture of something sacred. But then a cold flame rose inside me, one I hadn't felt in years. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd show them how it was truly done. At first light, I was up, not for chores, but with a different purpose. Tasha and Harlan, tired from their late celebration, slept in. That gave me time. While brewing coffee on the small hot plate in the service room, I thought through what I knew of my so-called new overseers. Harlan bragged about business success, but I'd noticed things he thought I'd miss. His watch was a cheap imitation. His shoes were scuffed and restitched. His eyes lit up like a starving dog at the mention of the land's value. A truly prosperous man wouldn't have shown such obvious greed. And I knew Tasha better than she thought. Ambitious, yes, but impulsive and sloppy. Back in school, when she cheated on a test, she always made the kind of mistakes that gave her away. This time wouldn't be any different. Their greed and haste would be their undoing. Stepping into the main yard, I found Miss Lila sweeping leaves by the front steps. More than an employee, she'd been a pillar of this place. She looked up, worry written in the furrows of her brow. "Mr. Langston, is it true what Miss Tasha said? That you won't be running the homestead anymore?" She had that practical wisdom of women who've seen a lot of life, and her instincts rarely failed. "Lila," I said softly, "I need a big favor, and it has to be our secret." Her eyes flashed, but she nodded without hesitation. Whatever you need, sir. I want you to head into town and find Attorney Miles Carter. Ask him to come see me, but tell him not to mention a word to Tasha or her father-in-law. He should pretend it's just a social visit. Lila scowled. Attorney Carter isn't the one who supposedly helped with the papers yesterday, is he? I blinked. Of course Lila knew everybody in Riverton, and she knew Miles, honest as a day is long, would never be part of such a sham. Exactly, I said. That's why I need to talk to him. Someone is using a good man's name for something foul, and he has a right to know. While Lila readied the pickup, I began the first phase of my plan. I play the role they expected, the confused, submissive old man who accepted everything without a fuss. When Tasha and Harlan finally came downstairs around noon, they found me on the porch, reading an old newspaper, looking as if I didn't have a care in the world. Good morning, Dad, Tasha said, a forced smile tugging at her lips. How did you sleep in your new room? The way she stressed new room told me she enjoyed my humiliation. Just fine, baby girl, I said in a placid voice. It's quiet and comfortable, perfect for an old man like me. Harlan appeared behind her dressed like a man playing ranch boss. White shirt, pressed slacks, strolling through my home as if he owned it. Mr. Langston, I hope you understand that from now on some things will change. I'll need all the information, workers' lists, contracts, bank accounts, vendors. Of course, I replied meekly. It's all in the study desk. Files are organized by year and topic. I'm sure you'll find what you need. He smiled, convinced he had won without a fight. Perfect. Tasha and I will spend the morning reviewing everything. You can rest easy. I watched them haul boxes like vultures stripping a carcass. But there was something they didn't know. Among all those files they were so eager to sift, they wouldn't find the most important information. The real documents, original deeds, updated titles, my true will, were hidden where they'd never think to look. As they disappeared into the study, I walked calmly to the old barn at the back of the property. My father and I had raised that skeleton of timber when I was a boy. It looked abandoned now, but appearances deceive. Behind a few loose boards on the back wall, I'd built a small compartment for my most valuable papers. There they were, the original deeds, the current title, my real will, and something crucial to my plan, a set of photographs and documents I had collected about Harlan over the last few months. You see, I wasn't as naive as they believed. Ever since Tasha had started bringing her father-in-law to family gatherings, something about him set my teeth on edge. A truly successful man doesn't brag so loud or drop names so often, so I made some discreet inquiries. What I discovered was fascinating. Harlan Pierce wasn't the prosperous businessman he claimed to be. He was a professional con man with an impressive history of scams. I had copies of lawsuits for real estate fraud in 3 different states, documents showing how he tricked entire families with promises of lucrative investments, then vanished with their money. Even a photo of him leaving a courthouse in cuffs after one of his trials. My daughter had crawled into bed with a rattlesnake. Most interesting of all was a record I had obtained through a contact in the city. Harlan owed serious money to predatory lenders, the kind who don't accept excuses and don't forgive delays. He needed cash desperately, and my homestead was his life raft. That explained the rush, the pressure, the elaborate lie about my supposed dementia. I arranged the papers in a leather satchel and headed back to the house, just as Attorney Carter's dusty blue Jeep rolled up. Miles was in his 50s, honest to the bone, handling my family's legal affairs for over a decade. His face showed confusion and concern as he stepped out. Mr. Langston, he said, lifting his hat. Lila said it was urgent. Is everything all right? Before I could answer, hurried footsteps sounded from inside. Tasha and Harlan had seen the attorney arrive and came toward us with forced smiles stretched tight as drumheads. Miles, Harlan exclaimed, too cheerful. What a coincidence, you dropping by. Attorney Carter frowned. Coincidence? Mr. Langston asked me to come. Harlan's jaw stiffened. Right, of course. He probably wants to clarify something about the documents he signed yesterday at your office. Miles's brow knit. What documents? I haven't seen Mr. Langston at my office in over 2 months, since we updated his will. Silence fell like an iron gate. Tasha jumped in, flustered. Dad must be confused. You know how his memory is lately. My memory is perfect, I said, meeting Harlan's eyes. Miles, they showed me documents implying I transferred this homestead to Mr. Pierce. Supposedly, I signed them in your office, with you notarizing. Anger flushed Miles's face. Impossible. First, my office was closed all day yesterday, my secretary's funeral. Second, I would never oversee such a transfer without rigorous review and ensuring Mr. Langston fully understood the implications. Harlan began to sweat, tripping over his words. There must be some misunderstanding. Maybe it was another notary. There are several in town. But Miles was already leafing through the papers Tasha had laid on the porch table. With each page, his expression hardened. These are fake, he declared, voice like a gavel. Mr. Langston's signature is clearly forged. My seal is a crude imitation, and the format doesn't match what we use. Also, there are legal errors no competent attorney would make. He turned to Harlan, eyes blazing. Sir, this is forgery of official documents, identity theft, and attempted fraud. Serious crimes. Tasha went white as copier paper. There must be a mistake. Harlan told me everything was in order. But Harlan was already inching toward his car, sweating through his shirt. I don't know anything about fake documents. Somebody tricked me. They told me it was all legal. Who told you? Miles pressed, cool as a prosecutor. Harlan kept backpedaling. I don't remember. It was a while ago. Maybe I'm mixed up. His panic was so raw that even Tasha began to see she'd been used. I decided it was time for the next move. Miles, I said evenly, you should know a few things about Mr. Pierce before we decide what to do. I opened the satchel and laid out the records I gathered. For instance, did you know he has outstanding warrants in 2 states for fraud and forgery? Harlan's face crumpled as he saw the printed records. Tasha stared at him, horror widening her eyes. Harlan, what is this? He tried to hold the mask of respectability together. Tasha, I can explain. Those are misunderstandings. People who didn't understand my business methods. Methods? I barked, letting the old man mask drop for the first time. You call it methods when you steal a farm family's savings in Jackson County or swindle a widow in Brookdale with a phony real estate scheme. Miles scanned the papers quickly, his expression darkening with every page. Mr. Langston, this is very serious. This man is a career criminal. He turned to Harlan, voice now fully official. Mr. Pierce, I'm obliged to report this to the authorities immediately. Forging a notarial seal is a felony. Harlan bolted for his car. This is a setup. You all set me up, he shouted, diving into the driver's seat. Tasha ran after him, crying out. Harlan, wait, explain. But the engine roared, and he tore down the drive in a storm of gravel, abandoning my daughter in the mess he'd made. Tasha stood stranded, watching his taillights vanish. She turned to me slowly, tears spilling, her face a portrait of shattering certainty. Dad, I didn't know he was a con man. A criminal who used you to try to steal everything I have, I said, my voice cold. She lowered her head, unable to meet my eyes. For the first time in this nightmare, she seemed to comprehend the size of what she'd done. Miles gathered the papers into his briefcase and set a hand on my shoulder. Mr. Langston, I'll file a formal complaint against Harlan right away. I'll also alert colleagues in neighboring states he's still active. He paused, looking at Tasha sternly. As for your daughter, technically she participated in the attempted fraud. Tasha's head snapped up, panic flickering in her eyes. I didn't know the documents were fake. Harlan convinced me everything was legal, she said desperately. For a moment, I felt a small sting of pity, but it vanished when I remembered the conversation I had overheard, the one where she and that snake plotted to lock me away and sell my land. Tasha, I said, my voice low but steady. There's something else you need to know. She looked at me through her tears, hoping I'd tell her it was all a misunderstanding, that we could somehow fix what was broken. But those weren't the words she was going to hear. I heard your conversation last night, I said, each word deliberate. All of it. Her face drained of color. What conversation, Dad? She stammered, her voice trembling, still trying to cling to denial. Attorney Carter looked between us, realizing there was more to this than legal fraud. The one where you and Harlan talked about selling my land for $8 million, I continued. Where you planned to have me committed. Where you asked him how long it would take to liquidate everything. The cattle, the machinery, even the house. Every word hit her like a hammer. She took a shaky step backward, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled for excuses. No, Dad, you misunderstood. We were just... Stop. I cut her off. I also heard him explain those special institutions he mentioned. Those places that don't ask questions. Where old men disappear quietly. And I heard you ask how soon it could all be done. Tasha's knees buckled, and she fell into the dust, sobbing uncontrollably. Dad, please. I didn't mean it like that. I was scared. I was confused. Harlan made it sound like it was for your own good. Her words spilled out, hollow and desperate. Attorney Carter straightened his glasses, his voice taking on a grim, professional tone. Ms. Langston, what your father is describing isn't just fraud. It's conspiracy, unlawful detention, possibly even attempted kidnapping. These are serious crimes. I didn't want to hurt him, she cried. Harlan told me it was the only way. He said Dad was sick, that it was for his safety. I stepped closer, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. When you were 8 years old, Tasha, you broke your mother's favorite vase. You tried to blame the cat, remember? She blinked through her tears, startled by the sudden memory. I set you right here on this porch, I continued, pointing to the same wooden steps beneath our feet. And I told you the truth always comes out. That lying only makes things worse. You cried then too, but in the end, you told the truth. You promised me you'd never lie again. She covered her face with her hands. I know, Daddy. I know. But that little girl, I said quietly, she's gone. In her place stands a woman who planned to rob her father and have him locked away to die alone. Please, Daddy, forgive me, she begged, crawling toward me, her voice cracking. It was a mistake. I didn't see what he was doing. Please, I'll do anything. Attorney Carter cleared his throat, uncomfortable but resolute. Ms. Langston, I suggest you get legal representation immediately. Everything your father said is on record now. The prosecutor's office will want to question you, and anything you say can and will be used against you. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone, an object that supposedly a senile man like me wouldn't know how to use. There's something else, I said. Last night, when I heard your conversation, I didn't just memorize it. Tasha looked up, her eyes wide with dawning horror. I recorded it. She froze, disbelief washing over her face. That's not possible. You don't even know how. I pressed play. Her own voice poured into the afternoon air, clear as church bells. How long do you think it'll take to sell everything? And then Harlan's oily tone. 3 months. After commissions, we'll clear about $8 million. Attorney Carter's jaw tightened. He listened a moment longer, then nodded firmly. This is damning evidence, Mr. Langston. With this recording, we can prove every part of their conspiracy. Tasha crumpled into the dust again, trembling. Oh God, she whispered. What have I done? Before I could answer, the sound of engines approached from down the road. Attorney Carter glanced toward the gate. I called the authorities before I came here, he admitted softly. I thought we might need protection. Moments later, 2 state patrol cars pulled up the drive, lights flashing but sirens off. The lead officer stepped out. It was Commander Ellis Harper, a tall man with a weathered face and steady eyes. I'd sold cattle to him before. He knew me well enough to recognize that I wasn't losing my mind. Mr. Langston, he said, tipping his hat. The attorney here told us there's a serious situation. Are you all right? I'm fine, Commander, I replied calmly. But my daughter and her accomplice tried to defraud me out of my property using forged documents. He's gone, but she's here. Ellis took the forged papers and the phone from my hands, reviewing them quickly. His expression hardened. These are solid pieces of evidence. He turned toward Tasha, who sat trembling at the edge of the porch. Ma'am, I'm afraid you'll have to come with us to answer some questions. You have the right to remain silent and to an attorney." "No," she screamed, scrambling toward me. "Daddy, please, don't let them take me. I'm your daughter. You can't do this to me. Think of your grandson. He needs his mother." Her words hit something deep inside me. For a split second, I hesitated. But then I remembered, family doesn't betray family. Family doesn't conspire to destroy its own. I straightened my shoulders. "Tasha," I said quietly but firmly, "you stopped being my family the moment you planned to steal everything I built. The moment you decided I was a problem to be solved instead of a man to be loved." The officers guided her gently, but firmly toward the patrol car. She fought, sobbing, screaming. "This isn't over. When I get out, I'll fight for what's mine. That land should be mine." Even now, caught red-handed, she still believed she was entitled. I turned away, unable to watch as they closed the car door. The sound of the engine faded down the long road until only the wind remained. Attorney Carter lingered beside me, his face etched with empathy. "Mr. Langston, I know this must be painful, turning in your own daughter." "It's necessary," I said softly. "If I don't stop her now, she'll only find another way to destroy herself, and me along with her." He nodded. "You did the right thing." "What will happen to her?" I asked quietly. "She'll be questioned, probably charged with conspiracy and attempted fraud," he said. "Given the evidence, she might get a lighter sentence if she cooperates." I nodded slowly. My gaze drifted across the land, the cattle grazing peacefully, the trees whispering in the breeze, the same fields I tended for 4 decades. "Let justice do its work," I murmured. "This land will outlast us all." Over the next few days, the homestead settled into a strange calm. For the first time in months, there were no tense voices echoing through the hallways, no footsteps sneaking around at night. The workers went back to their duties, the routine of life returning like a healing rhythm. Miss Lila came back to the main house with a lightness I hadn't seen in years. "Mr. Langston," she said as she stirred the pot on the stove, "folks in town are talking about what happened. Everyone says you showed real strength. People have been scammed by men like that before, but no one's ever fought back the way you did." I smiled faintly. "Sometimes it's not strength, Lila. Sometimes it's just what's right." Later that afternoon, Calvin, my cattle foreman, stopped by the porch. "Boss," he said, scratching his hat nervously, "we were real worried when we heard Miss Tasha was planning to fire us all. We didn't know what we were going to do." "You don't need to worry anymore," I said firmly. "As long as I'm breathing, no one here loses their job." Relief spread over his face like sunrise. "Thank you, sir. We'd follow you anywhere." For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe easy. The homestead was safe again, or so I thought. 3 days later, Attorney Carter returned, his expression grave. "Mr. Langston, I've got bad news. The police tracked Harlan's car to a motel outside Jackson City. But when they arrived, he was gone. Someone must have tipped him off." I exhaled slowly. I figured as much. A man like that doesn't sit still long. "That's not all," Carter added. "Witnesses saw him talking with a few rough-looking men before he disappeared. According to police, they might be the loan sharks he owes money to." That chilled my blood. "You think he told them about my land?" "It's possible," Carter admitted. "We should strengthen your security immediately, and I recommend transferring all your important documents to the bank vault." That night, I sat in my study, sorting through papers by lamplight, when I heard something outside, a faint metallic sound, like wire being cut. My pulse quickened. It was close to midnight. I rose quietly and peered out the window. In the darkness, beams of light moved near the old barn, 5, maybe 6 figures, working methodically. These weren't common thieves. They moved too carefully, too organized. I reached for the rifle hanging by the door, the same one my father had left me, and dialed Commander Harper on the phone. "Commander, it's Langston," I whispered. "There are intruders on my property. At least 5 of them, near the barn." "Don't go out there," Harper warned. "Stay inside. My men are on their way." But while he spoke, I saw one of the shadows peel away, heading straight for the main house, carrying what looked like a crowbar. I switched off the lights and took position near the front door. My heartbeat thudded steady, but my mind was sharp. I'd faced worse things in my life than greedy men. The intruder reached the porch. The lock rattled, then gave way. The door opened with a soft creak, and the beam of a flashlight cut through the dark. "Search the study," a voice hissed from outside. "The old man keeps the deed somewhere." It was Harlan's voice. The moment I heard his voice, cold and snake-like, a fire lit inside me. Harlan had come himself, desperate enough to risk everything. The man stepping into my house was just one of his hired thugs, but outside, the others waited in the dark, ready to tear my life apart again. The intruder crept into the hallway, his flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. He was wearing gloves and a mask, moving with the silence of someone who'd done this before. When he reached the study door, he whispered, "All clear," to the others outside. I stepped from the shadows and leveled my rifle. "Looking for something?" The man froze, his flashlight beam jerking toward me. He dropped it in shock, and it rolled across the floor, sending spinning circles of light around the room. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then his voice came low and dangerous. "You should have stayed asleep, old man." "I sleep just fine," I said, steady as stone. "But not when snakes crawl into my house." He took a step toward me, trying to sound brave. "You don't want trouble. Just hand over the papers and we'll go. Nobody gets hurt." "The only papers you'll see tonight are the ones for your own arrest," I replied, cocking the rifle. The smirk left his face, replaced by a flicker of fear. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't." Before he could finish, a sharp click echoed in the dark as I released the safety. "Try me." Outside, I could hear movement. Harlan shouting, boots crunching gravel, orders barked in panic. "Hurry up. We don't have much time." The man before me hesitated, torn between fight and flight. Finally, he tried to lunge sideways toward the door, but the sound of approaching sirens split the night. The wail of police cruisers grew louder with every second. He froze, eyes wide. "Harlan, it's the cops," he shouted toward the window. I saw shadows scatter through the yard. "Damn it," Harlan's voice roared. "Grab what you can and go." But before the thug in front of me could move, I stepped forward, keeping the rifle aimed. "Not you. You're staying right here." He glared, rage replacing fear. "You think you can stop us? There are 5 of us out there." "I was in the army once," I said, calm as a sermon. "I've handled worse than 5 amateurs with crowbars." For a second, he almost believed me. Then the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the windows. Tires screeched. Shouts filled the night. "Police, drop your weapons." Outside, chaos erupted. Men running, shouting, one gunshot cracking through the dark. The intruder before me turned to flee, but I blocked his way. "You're not going anywhere, son." "Old fool," he spat, reaching for something under his jacket. But I raised the rifle, aiming straight at his chest. The sound of the hammer snapping into place froze him solid. "Hands up," I said. He hesitated, then slowly raised them. "You're crazy." "No," I replied quietly. "I'm tired." Moments later, Commander Harper and 2 deputies burst through the front door, guns drawn. "Mr. Langston." Harper shouted, "You all right?" "I'm fine," I said, lowering my rifle. "He's one of them." The officers cuffed the man, dragging him toward the door. "We got 3 more outside," Harper said, but Harlan slipped away again. He knows this area too well. The intruder cursed under his breath as they hauled him out. "You'll never catch him." He spat. He said he'd get what he came for, one way or another. I stared after him, feeling the weight of his words settle in my gut. "He'll try again," I murmured. Harper nodded grimly. "We'll issue an expanded search. But be careful, Mr. Langston. That man's desperate. Desperate men are dangerous." The next morning, the sun rose over the property, but the peace it brought felt fragile. The workers moved quietly, whispering about the break-in, about how the boss had faced armed men alone. I told them not to worry, but deep down, I knew the storm wasn't over. Later that day, Harper came by again. "We interrogated the man you caught," he said. He confessed Harlan promised each of them 100,000 pesos to help him retrieve some documents from your home. He told them you were senile and wouldn't fight back. I snorted bitterly. He doesn't know me very well. Harper's face was serious. We're expanding the manhunt. He's got too many debts and too few places to hide. But you should still watch your back. After he left, I sat on the porch, cleaning my rifle as the afternoon wind carried the smell of dust and cattle. I'd built this land with my own hands. No slick-talking criminal was going to take it from me. Not while I still drew breath. Over the next few days, I reinforced the property. New locks, floodlights, cameras at every corner. I even hired 2 guards from town, men I trusted. Miles Carter helped move all my important papers into a bank vault. Still, I knew Harlan wouldn't stop. And I was right. A week later, Miss Lila came running up the path, breathless and wide-eyed. "Mr. Langston, you need to hear what folks are saying in town." "What now?" I asked, already sensing trouble. "There's talk that you've gone crazy," she said, voice shaking. "People are saying you attacked a social worker last week, that you've been seen yelling at nobody, that you can't remember who you are. Someone's spreading lies fast." My stomach turned cold. "Harlan," I whispered. "He's trying to ruin my name." It was a clever move. If he couldn't steal my land by force, he'd do it through reputation. Convince the town and the law that I was losing my mind, and he could have me declared incompetent. The very next morning, the local doctor, old Dr. Morris, called me. "Langston," he said cautiously, "I've had people asking about your mental health. Even a woman claiming to be from social services called, asking for your records." "Did you tell her anything?" I asked. "Of course not," he replied. But she was persistent. Said there'd been reports of violent outbursts, confusion. "I thought you should know." That was confirmation enough. Harlan was orchestrating a smear campaign, setting up the pieces for another kind of theft, legal this time. "Doctor," I said, "I need your help. I want a full evaluation, medical, psychological, everything. I want it documented officially that I'm sound of mind." He agreed immediately. "Come by tomorrow morning. We'll make it formal." That afternoon, as I was going through the day's mail, a car pulled up in front of the house. Sleek, dark government plates. A woman in her 40s stepped out, dressed in a tailored suit and carrying a leather briefcase. She approached the porch with a practiced smile. "Mr. Langston? Good afternoon. I'm Patricia Salinas with the Department of Social Services for Seniors. We've received reports of concern regarding your well-being." Her tone was professional but warm, the kind of voice designed to make people drop their guard. "Reports?" I repeated. "From who?" "We receive information from a variety of sources," she said smoothly. "Family, neighbors, local officials. It's routine for us to conduct evaluations in such cases." I gestured for her to sit, though every instinct told me to stay cautious. "Would you like some coffee?" "Thank you," she said, settling into a chair on the porch. "Just a few questions, Mr. Langston." At first, her questions seemed harmless. How long I'd lived alone, whether I had trouble remembering things, if I felt anxious or confused. I answered each one clearly and calmly. But soon, her tone changed. "I understand you recently had a disagreement with your daughter over the management of this property," she said. "Wouldn't it be easier for someone else to handle the financial details for you?" I narrowed my eyes. "That depends on who's asking." She smiled politely, but there was calculation behind it. "It's not uncommon, Mr. Langston. Many older adults find relief when family members or appointed guardians assist with decision-making." That was when I knew. She wasn't here for any routine visit. "Miss Salinas," I said slowly, "who exactly reported these concerns?" "I'm afraid that information is confidential," she replied smoothly. "But I can tell you there were multiple sources, including a family member. The report mentioned signs of aggression and memory lapses." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the table beside me. It was Miles Carter. His voice was tense. "Mr. Langston, I need you to listen carefully. I just checked the government registry. There is no Patricia Salinas working for social services in this region. Whoever's with you, she's an imposter. I looked up slowly. The woman across from me froze under my stare. Miss Salinas, I said evenly, would you mind showing me your identification again? She hesitated, then reached into her briefcase and handed me a laminated card. It looked legitimate at first glance, but the phone number prefix didn't match the official offices in Jackson County. I set the card down and spoke calmly. You know, Miss Salinas, you made a mistake coming here. Her eyes flicked toward the driveway. I think I should be going now. I stepped between her and the door. You're not going anywhere until the police arrive. Her mask dropped. You don't understand. If you call them, you'll regret it, she hissed, her voice suddenly sharp. I've already called them, I said, holding up my phone, and they'll be here any minute. She tried to push past me, but she underestimated 70 years of farm work and army training. I caught her arm firmly and guided her back into the chair. Let go. This is assault, she cried, struggling. Funny, I said. That's exactly what the last man who broke into my property said. Within 10 minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up the drive, Commander Harper stepping out with his hand on his holster. The woman's composure shattered as they questioned her. Inside her briefcase, they found fake government seals, blank forms, and a burner phone filled with text messages from, of course, Harlan. She broke down and confessed everything. Her real name was Patricia Ruiz, a former government employee fired for corruption. Harlan had paid her 50,000 pesos to pose as a social worker, evaluate me as mentally unfit, and submit a false report to the court. When the officers took her away, Harper turned to me, shaking his head. Mr. Langston, that man's more dangerous and clever than we thought. He's not just trying to rob you. He's building a whole campaign to destroy you. I watched the patrol cars disappear down the road, feeling the old fire rise in me again. Then it's time, I said quietly, for me to destroy him first. I watched Harlan's taillights kick up dust and vanish down the road, and for a long moment all I could hear was the wind through the cottonwoods. That was the night I decided I wasn't going to wait for him to strike again. He'd come close once and failed. He'd try any trick, legal theft, crooked officials, hired thugs. But he didn't know the people who worked for me. He hadn't figured the kind of stubbornness that grows in a man who's spent a life breaking rock and raising cattle. He didn't know what he'd awakened. 2 days later, just after dawn when the mist was still hugging the low ground, a rumble of a truck came up the lane and stopped right by the henhouse. I was filling the feed when I saw them. Harlan stepping out of a rusted pickup I didn't recognize, flanked by 2 big men with a look of hired muscle. They walked like predators who'd found fresh game. Harlan, I called, trying to keep my voice steady. Back so soon. He smiled like a man taking candy from a baby. Morning, Mr. Langston, he said. I came for the papers. We don't have to make this ugly. I stepped closer to the chickens on purpose, hands full of corn. You can take them from my cold, dead hands, Harlan. The men behind him shifted, hands brushing the bulges under their jackets. They'd come prepared. Harlan didn't bother with pleasantries. He pulled an envelope from his coat, flung it onto the porch table, and spread out a stack of documents, clearly forged. But he wanted me to be afraid enough to sign anything. Sign these transfer papers right now, he barked. You'll do it here, or this ends badly for you. He had a gun tucked into his waistband, and the smaller of his 2 companions had already drawn a pistol and pointed it at my chest. The smaller one had the nastiest look, mean eyes, meaner hands. The other man loomed behind, bulky and silent, like a shield for violence. You come here with a gun, I said, voice as flat as a plow blade. And you think you'll make me put my name on papers I never agreed to? Harlan laughed. Sign or die. Your choice. Something cold and familiar crept into me then. The old soldier's blood you don't lose. I didn't reach for the rifle inside the house. I reached for the shovel leaning by the feed bin. It wasn't much against a pistol, but it was something I could swing with enough force to stop a man. I picked it up slow, giving them time to watch me and to see I wasn't tripping or trembling. You'll have to take that. The big one with the scars stepped forward. He moved like he'd thought about it too much. That's fine, I said and swung. The shovel connected with that first thug's ribs with the sound of a tree being split. He doubled over, the pistol clattering from his hand. The other man cursed and lunged, but before he could draw a bead, I heard the roar of engines behind me. Calvin's pickup and Reggie's old dirt bike barreling down a side path, two shapes leaping from their vehicles, like men who'd been waiting on a signal. "Patron!" Calvin yelled as he came up the porch steps, a machete in his hand. He'd always been my right hand with the cattle, steady, reliable, the kind of man who'd follow you through fire. Reggie, younger but a bull with a good aim, drew a length of pipe and stood beside him. Harlan's face shifted from arrogance to panic. Go! Go! Get in the truck!" he snarled to his men. They hesitated, then ran for the pickup. One tried to grab his injured partner, but Calvin and Reggie moved faster. Reggie's pipe knocked the other man's arm. He stumbled and fell. Harlan ran, slamming the truck into gear, and peeled out the drive, gravel and dust spinning into the air. They left two men behind, groaning on the porch, one clutching his ribs, the other swearing and bleeding. We held them until Commander Harper and two deputies arrived, summoned by Miss Lila, who'd seen the whole thing, and called in a panic. The deputies arrested the two thugs, who babbled about money and promises. One muttered Harlan's name like it was a prayer and a curse. That night, after the police had taken the prisoners away and patched the porch railing, I sat on the steps and ran my hands over the wood I'd hammered 40 years ago. "He'll be back," I said aloud to the dark. "He'll be clever next time," Calvin answered, sitting beside me. "But he's got one thing wrong. He's made a lot of enemies, not just in town." Reggie laughed, the sound like metal hitting metal. "He can run, but he can't hide forever." Days folded by with a new kind of vigilance. We bolstered the fence, put up motion lights, and Miles Carter helped move the original deeds to the bank vault in town. Commissioner Harper arranged neighborhood patrols, and my name went around in meetings on radio chatter like a warning. Watch out for Harlan Pierce. Then the phone call that changed everything came in the middle of a stifling afternoon. The number on the line showed the county lockup. My heart froze. "Mr. Langston?" The voice on the line belonged to Tasha, thin, ragged, full of pleading. She'd been at the jail. She sounded small and frightened. "Dad, it's Tasha. I need to talk to you about Alex." My chest clenched so hard I thought I might drop the phone. "Where is he? Where's your boy?" "He's gone," she sobbed. Harlan took him 2 days ago. He came to the house, said it was an emergency, and he took Alex. He says he'll keep him unless you give him everything. He called from a payphone, Dad. Said if you don't transfer the homestead to him by Sunday morning, the boy disappears. He said nobody must be with you, no police. The world narrowed to the circle of light from the lamp on my workbench. Alex, my grandson, 8 years old, the last pure thing left caught in the crossfire of other people's greed. I pictured the kid's gap-toothed grin, his scuffed sneakers, the way he'd run to hug my legs when I came in from the fields. My hands shook, less from age than from anger, so hot it hurt. Did he say where he's holding him? I demanded. He said only that he's safe for now, that he'll call again. He told me to tell you the bank. He wants the deed at the bank on Sunday at 9. You go alone, sign the papers, then go to the old chapel at mile 15 at 11, and you'll get Alex back. If you call the police or try anything, he said he'll disappear with him. Her voice cracked into a howl. Please, Dad. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I pressed the phone to my ear until it warmed. Stay there, Tash. Don't say nothing to nobody. Tell them you don't know where Alex is. Don't let them hear you talking on the phone. I'll handle this. When I hung up, the anger in me curdled into a cold, steady resolve. This was no ordinary criminal act. Harlan had crossed a line. He had my grandson, and he'd used my own daughter, deluded or complicit, to get him. I called Commander Harper. His voice was a low instrument of calm. We can't rush him with guns and blow the boy's life apart. He's counting on that. If he's telling the truth, and the kids out there, we've got to be precise. I don't trust that man, I said, but I also don't want Alex hurt. What do you suggest? Let's bring in federal help, Harper said after a pause. This might be more than a county job. If he's linked with loan sharks and other states, we need the feds. I remembered a name I'd hoped I'd never have to use. Carlos Rivera, an old Army buddy who'd gone on to the Federal Investigation Arm years ago. We'd lost touch, but the few times our paths crossed, he'd been the kind of man who kept promises. I called him and explained fast, without drama, the way men exchange coordinates. Carlos listened without interrupting. "Don't do anything until we say so," he told me. "We'll run it, but we'll need you to cooperate. If he's taken the boy, this is a first priority. Don't go alone. If he insists you come alone to that chapel, we'll set a controlled exchange. We'll get him, Mr. Langston, but we need you to follow instructions." Sunday was 2 days away. That meant 48 hours to prepare, to bait the trap Harlan thought he'd laid. I had to play the part he wanted. Frail, compliant, a man who'd fold. I had to make him believe I would sign. Miles Carter agreed to prepare the transfer papers. The real ones would be papers with a clause the bank manager and the feds would use to cancel the transfer as soon as the operation closed. It sounded like a legal dance, a conjurer's trick, but we had the bank manager and Miles on our side. At dusk, I walked the perimeter with Calvin and Reggie, talking quietly about contingencies. If we have to make noise, make sure it's not the kind that brings him back to the house, I said. If he tries to play tough, don't be a hero. Hold him until the police get here. They nodded, eyes fierce. We got your back, Patron. That night, I hardly slept. I sat on the porch with the files Miles had prepared, holding the weight of the paper like a promise and a lie at the same time. Alex's laugh in my head was a kind of prayer. If Harlan wanted my land, he could have tried to buy it with honest money. Instead, he'd taken a child. Sunday morning would decide everything. I'd go to the bank, sign the papers they wanted, and then go to the old chapel at mile 15. I'd go alone, because Harlan demanded it, but I would not be alone in the ways that mattered. The feds would be in place. Commander Harper would have units in the trees. Miles had prepared a document that looked true, but was a snare. Carlos and his team had the chapel sweeps mapped out. I folded the papers and slid them into my jacket pocket. Outside, the land breathed under a bright and indifferent sky. The homestead spread out like a map of a life. I had less than 48 hours to bring a boy home and finish with a man who tried to steal everything. I felt my age then, the number of years heavy like an old chain, but something else outweighed it. A clarity of purpose I'd never felt more sure of. I stood up, looking across the fields one more time, and said aloud, to myself and to the land, "Come Sunday, Harlan Pierce will learn what happens when you take what's not yours." Sunday came gray and tight, like a held breath. I dressed slow, choosing my worn jacket, not because I was trying to look frail, but because Harlan expected an old man's coat, a man who would sign away his life for the chance to see his grandson again. I ate nothing. My hands were steady, but my stomach churned like a plow in spring. Miles met me at the bank, his face hard and quiet. Carlos and 2 men I didn't know stood in a dark sedan across the street, faces like shutters. Commander Harper's cruiser lounged half a block away, an honest tooth in a crooked world. "You sure about this?" Miles asked, folding his hands on the mahogany desk like a man who'd handled many sharks. "I'm sure," I said. "If he wants the show, we'll give him the audience." The bank manager led us to a little room with a table and a single lamp. Miles slid the packet of documents across to me. They looked real enough to convince any man in a hurry. Miles had written special clauses into the transfer that would keep it unencumbered for the operation, then nullify it the moment the case closed. It was legal sleight of hand, and I trusted him like I trusted the river after a drought. I signed, each stroke deliberate, as if carving the letters into the grain of the porch steps back home. My signature felt like falling sand, and for a second part of me wondered if I'd been foolish. But Carlos's little nod through the glass told me the men in the trees were where they needed to be. The feds had the chapel coordinates, the old roads mapped, the escape routes watched. "You're not alone," Carlos said softly. "We'll take it from here." At 11 I drove to the old San Miguel Chapel, the gravel like small bones under my tires. The building crouched under a shawl of moss and shadow, an empty tooth in a long, lonely row of houses. Harlan's car sat by the gate, paint dulled and dusty. My heart beat a steady war drum, but my hands were calm. I walked up the path alone, the papers heavy in my coat pocket. When I passed the creaking iron bell, I half expected to see Harlan already holding Alex like a prize. But the yard was empty except for a folding chair and a small table. Alex sat in the chair, his legs swinging like a bird's, eyes red from crying but cheeks dirty and alive. He looked up when he heard my steps, and he tried to run, but an arm as thick as my wrist caught him. "Don't move," a voice said. It was Harlan, leaning in the shade with a rifle across his knees, like the prince of ruined men. Behind him, two men hunched, faces like bad dreams. "Alex," I said, and my grandson's face crumpled into a little scream of relief when I got to him. Harlan's smile was a well-practiced thing, spoiled and sharp. "You brought the papers?" he asked, voice oily. "I have them," I said, and I put the packet on the table with a careful hand. "Looks real, doesn't it?" He leaned forward, greed coiling in his eyes. "Sign them here. Now. Saturday now," he repeated, the gun near my ribs a sharp punctuation. I put my pen to paper slow as a sermon. When he could no longer hold his anger, he barked for Alex to come and sit on the table, so I wouldn't try anything. The boy's small hand found mine and gripped it like an anchor. "Make it quick," Harlan snapped. "When you sign, you walk across that field, and Alex comes with me." Outside the scrub, men slipped through trees, like shadows becoming real. Carlos whispered static into my ear. Two teams, left and right, closing. I could feel the earth breathing under my shoes when a drone hummed like a honeybee over the chapel, a thin, mechanical witness. I signed. That single stroke was the moment Harlan thought victory belonged to him. He laughed with the loud, ugly joy of a con convinced of his own infallibility. "See, easy as stealing candy from a baby," he crowed. "Okay," I said, standing. "We'll walk to the exchange point now." We moved slow, him leading with Alex as if the boy were a bargaining chip on a string. The trees tasted like wet iron. When we reached the clearing where the old pickup of Harlan's had to slow, the air snapped open with shouts. "Federal agents! Drop your weapons!" The men in the trees stepped out, guns raised and voices like thunder. Harlan's men cursed and reached for their pistols, but trained hands were on them in a breath. Carlos's team, Commander Harper's deputies, and the federal agents moving like a river, taking a low bank. Harlan stumbled back, trying to run, but an agent had him by the collar before his foot hit the gravel. He fought like a cornered animal, but the net was too tight. I saw fear, real, naked fear, open like a wound on his face. Alex flung himself into my arms before any hands could grab him, and all the tiredness in me fell away under his weight. "You okay, baby?" I asked, voice cracked with everything a man feels tethered inside. He nodded into my shirt, a small body as soft as a prayer. "I thought I'd never see you again," he whispered. We folded after that in a way I'm not proud to admit. Regulatory paperwork, agents asking the same questions again and again, Miles moving with a lawyer's grace like a man who knows how to close a wound. Harlan was taken in cuffs, shouting about scams and betrayal, his voice eaten by the engines and the men with badges. The thugs were rounded up. Their bruises and broken pride fit the shape of the wrongness they'd done. At the station, Tasha was waiting, her eyes rimmed in red, ruined, raw. She ran to Alex and wrapped him up in a flurry of apologies and sobs, then looked at me like a woman who'd been hollowed out and replaced. "Dad," she said, voice tiny. I didn't know. I didn't know what he was. He lied to me. I'm so sorry." The apology sat on the air like a thing both fragile and unfit to heal, but I knelt and took her hand anyway, because I am a man of roots and soil and second chances, only not at the expense of the innocent. "You did wrong," I said, not soft but not savage either. "You hurt me, and you hurt your son. You'll have to make amends. The law will sort out the rest." Later, in the porch light back at the homestead, Miles handed me a small stack of papers and a cup of coffee that tasted like victory and exhaustion combined. He smiled, that lawyer's half-smile. "The bank processed the transfer just as agreed," he said. "But the clauses, once the feds filed the motion this afternoon, The transfer was voided. Everything is back in your name. Relief rose like heat inside me. Not because of the paper. Paper's nothing next to a child. But because the land, the life I built, had stayed mine. The deeds returned to their hiding place, where I had always kept them, behind the loose board in the barn. I placed them there again and felt like a man putting his house in order after a storm. Harlan would face federal charges, fraud, kidnapping, conspiracy. The men who worked for him would get their day in court. Tasha would face consequences, too. The law and the weight of what she'd done wouldn't let her slip away unmarked. But Alex slept like an angel that night, and that was the ledger I balanced in my head. The child safe, the crook cuffed, the homestead whole. Sitting on the porch after midnight, I looked out over the land I'd coaxed into life. Rows of crops, the pond dark as glass, the house like a faithful old dog. Miles, who'd stayed late to make sure everything was settled, lit a cigarette and let the smoke curl up into the stars. "You did what you had to do," he said finally. "Not many would have faced all that." I shrugged, feeling older and younger all at once. You learn a few things when you spend a lifetime making something. You learn how to hold on. You don't give up your land. You don't let someone take your boy. And you don't let people decide who you are because of your age. The porch creaked under me, familiar as the lines in my hands. I thought about the choice I'd made weeks ago, the decision to fight rather than fold. I thought about Teresa, Tasha, about how desperately people sometimes chase a life that's not theirs until they break what they love most. I thought about how quick the world is to write off an old man, how easy it is to move the pieces on a board when no one's watching. Tomorrow I'd walk the fields again at dawn. There would be repairs to make, fences to mend, cattle to feed. There would be long talks with those who work the land, promises to keep, and maybe even a chance to teach Alex how to mend a fence or read the sky for rain. I'd let the law do its job with Tasha. Judgment and mercy are not mine to hand out alone. But as the night breathed down on us and the stars threw their cold, indifferent light across the yard, I felt a deep, steady peace settle into my bones. I had defended everything that mattered, the land, the life. The boy who would one day know that his grandfather did not yield when the world tried to steal what he loved. I had retired from nothing,